What is going on, YouTube? It is Primitive here, and welcome to round 3 of the locals that happened at J&J's the other day. This is going to be between myself on the left playing Imperial, and then my good friend, the other Mike F, on the right. So not only are we playing a mirror match in deck, but we are also the two Mike Fs. So we are mirror match in name. So this is my first event playing Imperial semi-seriously, and so I don't really know most of the matchups yet and how I should be approaching them 100%, and so I'm really just observing what my opponents are doing here and how I should respond, and really trying to figure out what's the best way to go, because I know leaving something suspended could be very dangerous in this matchup, and so I'm gonna have to probably keep my Imperials unsuspended when possible. But if you can see my hand right now, you can see that I have 2 or 3 Imperials and a Nidhogg in hand, so my hand is looking pretty rough. I'm drawing with the Demi V, and I wasn't feeling too bad until that Cocytus Breath happened, because now I am in just a very bad position. I was going to go into Imperial with the Imperialdramon. I could have played around the breath by swinging in first, but it's only a 1-of in his list, and I know that because we are friends, and so I didn't. The chances of me hitting it were very low, and I wanted to get the draw off of the Demi Vmon, and so my only bet now is to try to get back into a Imperialdramon, which I am suspended now, so I kind of have to hope that my opponent doesn't go into Dino Beamon and then go into Nidhogg. That could be really bad for me because my hand is filled. Yeah, we see the Nidhogg and 3 Imperials in hand, and so my hand is very filled with Megas, and so if I don't get a way to get these out and start getting a more functional flow of getting these Megas out, then I'm going to be pretty far behind, so I have to worry about that. But I see my opponent go into Imperialdra, and I'm a little less worried now because, like I said, I was worried about the Nidhogg, and so if he goes into Imperial here, that does suck, but it's not the worst. However, going into my turn, I'm not looking super amazing. My opponent has a Memory Tamer and I don't, so if they can just put me at very low memory. We are going to see them put me to 3, but they have the Syakomon on board, so I can't even go into Imperial for 3. So my opponent's in a very good position. That early Cocytus Breath really slowed me down to a point where I don't know if I'm going to be able to catch up, because if I was able to get the Imperial on board earlier with the Imperialdramon on top underneath it, then even if I wasn't going to be able to Digivolve for 3, I'd still have it on board and threaten for multiple swings in future turns. As for now, I'm just almost 1 to 2 turns behind my opponent, and I will almost always be 1 to 2 turns behind my opponent as long as the Sayako is on board, because going into Imperial is almost always going to end my turn unless I go into a couple Hammer Sparks. So my opponent's going to probably go in for close to game here. They can swing for 2 checks with the Imperial if they do choose, and then they can swing with the Sayako, and they have Lobomon pressure, so there's a lot going on here. I don't have many blockers in this deck. I only play the 3 Sealamon and the Grizzlymon, and so my actual defense is very low. I do have the Syakomon on the bench, which can come out next turn and slow down future Imperials, but with 1 on the board right now, it's not looking the most amazing. Luckily, it is the green Imperial, which means no Omnimon pressure. But as long as he's got an Imperial with a Imperialdramon underneath it, I am just a little bit too far behind. Now, I do have the option of swinging and then going into a Lobomon for pressure, but still not going to get me there. So without a couple Hammer Sparks and going into Imperial, I am pretty much deep out of luck here. As we can see, I have so many Megas and nothing to really do with them. Even if I had a Dino Beam on there, I could have went into a Nidhogg on one of the Imperialdramons, which could have been good. Put my opponent to 5 to unsuspend twice. It's the only thing that I can do. I have to hope that something happens, that I hit a couple Cocytus Breath, or that I hit a couple Hammer Sparks. Something's got to happen for my opponent to win. He does play the Dino Beamon, which makes it so double Hammer Spark will end the turn, but it doesn't matter. Nothing in the security there. So as you can see my hand right there, yeah, it was pretty, lots of Megas in there. But getting into game 2, I do have my opponent go first. That's just kind of my personal rule that I've been going by when playing new decks, is if I brick too hard, go second, so that way I draw more cards. And I felt like that was a pretty hard brick the first game with just how many Megas I had in hand. Although the game would have went different if there was the Cocytus Breath, I still felt comfortable going second and getting the memory. As we see, my opponent puts me to 4, so there's a lot that I can do here. I could go all the way up into Imperial if I wanted to. But I'm looking at my hand and I'm not seeing anything super impressive, so I actually just take this opportunity to hard play the Imperialdramon. My opponent's going to go to 3 anyway, but if you see my hand, I have Sealamon, Lobomon, Hammerspark, and Omnimon. So I could Digivolve on top of the Siakomon with the Sealamon, which could cycle, but as we saw game 1, Siakomon puts on so much pressure in the mirror on shutting down Imperials, so I wanted to keep my Siakomon alive. The Davis is going to be super helpful here because now I can play the Elekmon and then Digivolve into the Sealamon, which allows me to get a little bit of cycle. I don't have any level 6s right now, I just have the Omnimon, so I can't do anything super crazy, but I can swing over the Vmon, which does slow down my opponent a bit, but without being able to Digivolve on top the Imperialdramon, my opponent is going to get Sora Joe memory and Davis memory going to 5. So I just go into the Dino Beamon. That gives me another ultimate on board and allows me access to my green megas. Because as we saw, I have both Nidhogg, and if you watched my last round, I do have the Dino Bancho Stingmon in this list as well. So having access to all my megas, nothing on board yet, but we're feeling a lot better with this Davis on board because if we didn't hit that Davis, we would be just so very far behind right now. But as we see, we top deck the Imperial there, and so now I'm looking like I'm going to be in a pretty decent position. I have a really good spot here where I can actually swing with both the Dino Beamon and the Imperialdramon, and then I can Digivolve into Imperialdramon and unsuspend both. Obviously with the Siakomon, it is going to cost me 5 to Digivolve, so I can't go for a game-winning swing here, which I would be able to if there wasn't a Siakomon. Considering the Omnimon in hand gives even more checks, but I can still make it to where I can unsuspend both my Digimon so they can't get swung over, and my opponent can't go into their own Imperial because of my own Siakomon. But as we can see here, my opponent's going to swing, trying to duplicate the play I just did of unsuspending both their Digimon, but will hit the Hammerspark, which will end their turn. I swing and unsuspend with the Imperial. I hit the Hammerspark, but I do play my own Hammerspark, putting me at 2, so if I hit another Hammerspark, my turn will not end. But my opponent's going to go ahead and grab, I believe that was a Gorillamon and a Dino B, and then I'm going to swing, and the Siakomon will swing in, tying up this series 1-1. So we're about to go into game 3. Right here in a second at the beginning of the match, I do believe there was a little bit of a camera issue, so you're going to see a change of angle. Yep, right there. So the camera did have to move a little bit, so sorry about that little bit change of angle there, but we still have a pretty good view of the board. Nothing really too obstructive, just a little bit of a lighting change. But either way, my opponent is going to go ahead and hard play the Vmon, which is going to put me at 3, so I can Digivolve into the Sealamon and then play the Davis, putting my opponent at 2. And so now with my Memory Tamer on board, if my opponent doesn't also get a Memory Tamer, then I'll be very far ahead, because having the ability to not be choked and just always being at 3 in the mirror match, no matter really what mirror match it is, when your opponent doesn't have that access, is always going to be a very powerful thing, because memory choking is just such a great offensive tool. It really shuts down your opponent. So my opponent's going to play the Gabumon, which will just put me to 3 thanks to the Davis. But I can go ahead and Digivolve into the Dino Beamon now and swing over the Vmon, which will give me a piercing and jamming check. So one of my favorite plays to do with this deck when your opponent does extend early with lower Digimon is you can get that check, because as we see, my opponent's at 2 memory now. So even with a Hammerspark, we are going to not see anything. You saw me draw there. The reason being is I forgot to draw with the Demi Vmon there. However, it is a required ability. It is not optional. So once we caught it, I did draw the card because, like I said, it is a required effect. Which just goes to show how much I do enjoy getting those piercing checks over rookies with the Dino Beamon. So much so that I forgot to get my draw effect, which is one of the best inheritables in the whole deck. But my opponent's going to play the Siakomon now, so my Imperial, although I don't have one in hand, is going to be semi-shut down, because obviously unless I have double Hammerspark to go to 5, I'm not going to be able to play an Imperial in one turn. But I'm still looking a little bit ahead compared to my opponent. I do have the piercing checks with the Dino B, so it's going to be very powerful here with these 2 blockers, because they can't really block. And now I'm going to go into another Dino B. I decided to use the Hammerspark to choke my opponent because, like I said, I really don't want them to develop anything. As of right now, I have these 2 Dino Bs, which can't really be stopped by these blockers because of the piercing. So if they're going to keep blocking, I can just keep piercing. If I put my opponent to 1, I force them to have Hammer Sparks to do anything impactful, and if they don't have the Hammer Sparks, then they can really only develop maybe 1 ultimate or go into a champion on the raising, but they are just going to decide to go into the Dino B. No reason to keep the all the blockers on board if they are just going to get pierced through. So can stop the Elecmon that's out there, which we are going to see them keep on there for the Elecmon, but I do have a Hammer Spark in hand, so if I wanted to, I could go Hammer Spark and Digivolve my Elecmon into a champion and then to another Dino Beamon to get even more piercing checks. So my offensive pressure right now is incredibly high. I also have the Kakaitis Breath in hand, so there's a lot that I can do here. I can go into the Dino B, like I said before, to get the checks. I could Kakaitis Breath the Dino Beamon into my opponent's hand, and again, I'm using the Hammer Sparks for defensive memory because putting my opponent to 3 opposed to 4 shuts off any ability for them to get up into a Mega, and that's going to be very important because if they go into like a Imperialdramon and then get a few Hammer Sparks, because if they were at 4, then they would only need 2 Hammer Sparks to go into Imperialdramon and then go into Imperial to swing over by 2 Dino Beamons. So since I'm in a position where I don't need to use my Hammer Sparks aggressively, I am just using them defensively here to choke my opponent to the lowest amount of memory that I can, while also removing their ultimate, because if they go into Dino Beamon, I'm not scared of them digivolving into Dino Beamon. I'm only scared of them digivolving into the Imperialdramon because if they go to the Imperialdramon, then they can swing twice with the Imperial, but like I said, all of that shut down. They need triple Hammer Spark now, and there's no way that's going to happen, so we're going to see the Imperialdramon. My opponent's going to probably try and get checks in early, but without there being any tamers to potentially Lobomon and not being able to get Imperial to get the Blitz Omnimon, it's not looking super amazing. Neither of us have gone into a Mega this game, which is very funny because this game's going to end in 1 or 2 turns as it looks right now, and with no Megas coming out, it's going to be an Imperialist Imperial Mirror Game 3, and then Syakomon Savagery as they check each other in security. And my opponent is going to go ahead and right now they Hammer Spark to go up to 1, and then they do just go ahead and play the Davis. My opponent told me after that the reason that they made this play was because they figured that they're gonna need a miracle play to win next, or to survive next turn anyway, and if that miracle play does happen, they want to have Davis so that way they can digivolve into the Imperial next turn and go for game. So it was setting up for their best play next turn, but there was no really play there that was going to be able to save them, considering the piercing ability and how many Digimon were on board, so not even blockers would save them. But that was a very, very great game, a good mirror. That was my first time playing the mirror match, so very enjoyable. It was a very interesting, especially that game 3, but with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you soon for the finals of this tournament later today, so I hope you have a great day. I'll see you then. Peace out.